talk about the A2. Does everybody have the A2 amendment? Just put your hand up, sometimes easier if you have the A2. Senator Newman has it. Senator Carlson, you don't have it. Paul, you may need to do a...
Yep, I'll resend it.
All right. Are you resending it in the calendar invite or resending it in the email?
I will forward the original email. I mean, I had sent it to everyone in an update of the calendar invite, but I'll just resend it on the email. That's fine.
So members, if you go into your calendar, and for some of you using your phone, that can be a little more difficult. For those of you online, go into your calendar and under notes, that is usually where the links to bills are, and it is there in the calendar invite, the A2 amendment to Senate File 512. Senator Carlson, you got it now. Okay, Senator Kwadzinski, Senator Jasinski. Senator Newman, I think you said you had it already. Senator Lane.
Well, I looked through what came yesterday. I don't see it right now, but I did look through something yesterday. Is that up to date?
The A2, possibly. We're going to have an A3 to update just section 1.
But if it came over regular email, I could easily get on it.
Yeah, it's in the calendar. The A2 is in the calendar.
I sent it, Senator Lane, I resend it to you. I forwarded you a different one, but yes.
An email version, Paul?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's in your email then, Senator Lane. And Paul, this is being recorded as required by the Senate, correct? I see Senate Media is...
Yeah, Senate Media is taking care of it.
All right. Okay, good. Just a good reminder for everybody. We're still on that. Okay. Hello, Senator Rest. Do you have a copy of the E2? Have you seen it in your calendar invite? Unmute. Or just put your hand up. Yes, you got it. Okay, you're good. All right. Sometimes it's quicker to have a hand up, right? Okay, we're learning this tool here. Okay, so Senator Koran, again, Senate File 512 is in front of us. And just for purposes of discussion until Stephanie James comes back with an updated section 1, I'd like you to not move the A2, but for purposes of discussion, Senator Koran, if we could just talk about the A2 amendment starting at section 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'll just move the Senate File 512 and we'll leave the amendment for later. With that, Madam Chair, the section 2, so are we gonna just do an amendment for section 1 then that Stephanie's working on right now?
She's working on it as a complete amendment, the A3, but my understanding is only section 1 will have a small change and the rest of the sections will be the same. So we can do it one way or the other. We just wanted to.
Senator Kiffmeyer,
that'll work.
Senator Kiffmeyer,
yes,
call on Ms. James. She's raising her hand.
Oh, Ms. James. All right. You want to come on, Ms. James? You have the A3 ready?
Madam Chair and members, the A3 is on its way. It will be an amendment to the A2 document that you have there. So it'll just add one sentence and be very simple. And I can tell you what it is. So that I can tell you what it is if you would like, so that when it comes, you'll already be familiar with it.
Senator Koran, would you like to do that, or do you want to? I'm open.
Yes, Madam Chair. Let's cover it, and then we can have a complete and thorough discussion, and then we can move it when we all have it in hand.
Right. Okay, Ms. James, if you would explain the one sentence to section 1.
Madam Chair and members, the sentence will be added on page 1, line 14 of the amendment after the period. Loans under this section cannot be used to pay salaries or payroll expenses, period.
Okay, any questions on that language or anything else in section 1? We're on section 1 in its entirety now.
Madam Chair.
let's see, who is that?
Madam Chair, if Ms. James could repeat that sentence one more time.
Senator Newman's request to you, Ms. James, on line 1.14. Go ahead, Ms. James.
Yes, the sentence would be added at the end of line 14 of page 1, and the sentence is, loans under this section cannot be used to pay salaries or payroll expenses. And I can copy and paste that into the chat feature here, I think.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with that, what I'd like to do is we'll cover the bill. I guess with that information, we could probably move the A2 amendment, and then when we have the three all in hand, we can have an entire conversation, and we'll move the A3 before we move the rest of the bill.
Yeah. Thank you. Senator Koran moves the A2 amendment to Senate File 512. Ms. James, do you have, is that oral amendment sufficient, or do you want to use the amendment to the amendment?
Madam Chair and members, the oral amendment, I think works just fine. You would just incorporate that into the A2, and then when you move the A2, you'll have it all there.
All right, thank you. Okay, Senator Koran will incorporate the oral amendment. Then the A2 is in shape, and you can go ahead and start with section 1.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. The Senate File 512, as it's been amended to, this bill really looks at a multitude of steps to relieve the fiscal pressures of the charitable gaming organizations under this economic crisis, and some relief to those organizations under the COVID and again, the hardship. This is really focused on organizations that provide, well, all organizations, but then there's also subsections in there that really focus on our veterans organizations who provide other brick and mortar services that are ongoing and highly necessary to help them maintain and keep those facilities open, or, you know, it's supported by charitable gaming. And with that, Madam Chair, I think Mr. Getman is on, and he will be able to cover the details of every other element within the bill.
Okay, welcome, Mr. Getman. If you're on video, it helps. Oh, there you are. Okay, thank you, Mr. Getman. You can go ahead and walk us through the A2 amendment as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senators. Wanted to briefly describe that there are 6 sections of this bill, or I should say 6 different points. The first one that is dealing with Amendment 3 is dealing with the bricks and mortars, as Senator Koran had mentioned, and it's specifically to allow for the veterans and fraternal organizations to use the gambling funds to keep the bricks and mortars, to keep the buildings open that are being used in a quasi-government role. This has been a historical carve out for specifically fraternal organizations because they are not typically 501c3s. In the case of the 501c3s, like churches and some of the other organizations, the gambling funds can literally just be donated to the 501c3 for any purpose. So these kinds of statutes had been set up previously in order to accommodate the veterans and fraternal organizations' different status. And that's why they are carved out here, and that is the purpose of that section 1. Section 2 and section 4 are combined in my explanation of the bill, and they deal with the star rating systems. And Senator Koran had introduced that this is to alleviate the pressures that the lawful gambling organizations are dealing with during this pause in the gambling operations. And specifically, the star rating system requires minimum amounts of the gross receipts to be spent on certain things, lawful purpose expenditures. When these organizations are not even able to meet in order to vote and approve these expenditures, there's going to be a large number of organizations who are going to be forced into a negative status, a probationary status under the current star rating system because of this pause in the gambling operation and because of the executive orders that exist today. And so this section 2 and 4 are meant to alleviate that pressure and allow folks to, in essence, have the fiscal year 2020, which ends June 30th, be extended or be delayed, where they would not be negatively impacted by the pause in activities for this year. Section 3 is dealing with the, in essence, credit that is being used by organizations to pay for the actual lawful gambling equipment. So we're talking about buying the pull tab tickets or paying for the different distributor fees and manufacturer fees. Because the statute currently exists to not overextend the organizations, nor put the distributors and manufacturers in an awkward situation. There was a 30-day limit put. The issue is we at the Gambling Control Board forced the organizations, the charitable organizations, to close down all the games to protect the games, integrity of the games. And therefore, a lot of these games were closed prematurely, where they didn't actually even get the money to pay back the distributor, or enough money to pay back the distributor for that original game. So the purpose of this Section 3 is meant to allow these organizations to continue to have credit to buy those new games to start back up. Again, all the games that were in play were closed. They may or may not have some games in inventory, but either way, the 30-day limit would end up restricting them unnecessarily to be able to start back up. The next section to talk about, again, Section 2 and 4 went together. So Section 5 is dealing with all of the licenses, and this is no different from all of the other regulatory agencies that have licensing requirements. Because of this pause in operations, a lot of these organizations are having licenses that are either expiring or would otherwise require renewals. And we're asking that across the board there be that extension of the time period of this delay or this pause be applied to those licenses to allow folks to have a reasonable amount of time to then renew their license or not. Section 6 is dealing with an actual the exempt permit fees. These are the organizations that are not actually licensed for the 365 days a year, but these are the ones that have, under the exception, typically 4 days or less of gambling operations, typically less than $50,000. Numerous exceptions, but these are not the ones that have a gambling manager. These are the ones that are typically associated actually with an annual event. And so these exempt permits that are being applied for, that are tied, again, typically to an event, are not going to happen for another 365 days. And therefore, what we're asking for is the 365 days plus another month, or roughly 400 days, to allow these organizations to extend out that permit that they've already received to that next year's activity or event. Section 7, and again, just going through all these very quickly and stand ready for any questions on all of them. Section 7, which is the last section of this particular bill, is meant to respond to the fact that we've not been able to have our requirement or our required gambling manager training. And therefore, in the cases of these organizations needing to have a gambling manager in place, yet not being able to attend the required gambling manager training, we are needing this particular section to accommodate getting these new gambling managers, in some cases just temporary gambling managers, through the required training to ensure that they're able to help us ensure the integrity of the games that are out there. And Madam Chair, that's just the brief synopsis, and stand ready for any questions.
Okay, members, any questions, please raise your hand. I see Senator Rest to start off. Unmute yourself, please. Senator Rest, you're not unmuted yet.
I get it now. Thank you, Madam Chair. And either Mr. Getman or Senator Koran, in the Section 1, paragraph A, I'm a bit concerned that the only approval of these loans sits with just the director of the Gambling Control Board, rather than being, I don't know what the word, being subject to the approval of the Gambling Control Board itself on the recommendation of the executive director. And I wonder if there would be any problem, Senator Koran, with adding that extra layer. And of course, they can meet like we meet with Zoom, and and give their approval to the executive director's recommendation. And then I see nothing in here about whether the loans can in the future be forgivable. I see how they have to be repaid in a year, but I would feel more comfortable if anytime there is a loan language mentioned, Senator Koran, if there would be some sort of statement that these are not forgivable loans, and if anybody wanted them to be forgivable, it would not be under the authority of the Gambling Control Board. They would have to come back to the legislature and change the language to make them forgivable. And and that it's not far-fetched, because there have been a number of times in the past where various entities are able to make loans or use funds that would otherwise not be available to them, that they would have to pay back. And 2 years later, they come back, and I recall in particular the city of St. Paul a number of years ago came back and asked for those loans to be forgivable. And we still may do that because the conditions may warrant it, but I would like to start out at least. I would, welcome your reaction to the notion that these are not forgivable loans, that they do indeed have to be paid back within the time period. And I know you have the time period in there, and I think that's good, so it doesn't go forever. But I still think that we need to be real careful as we addressed all of these COVID-19 issues with keeping the funds straight, whole, and the relationship between the activity and the organization's other accounts be made crystal clear. And I would, I don't have any problem with the bill otherwise, but I just do think that those two things, that the Gambling Control Board itself should give the authority for them based on the recommendation of the executive director, and that when it, like in paragraph B, where it says all loans made under this section must be repaid, I wonder if you're comfortable enough with that language that makes no mention of the possibility of in the future of forgivability. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Koran, so there's two issues here, having approval of this loan from the Gambling Control Board recommended by the director of the local, and then the concept of forgivable loans, which don't seem all that unreasonable.
No,
Senator Koran?
thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Rest, if we can tighten up, I don't know that Mr. Getman or any of us would have any problems with those suggestions from the perspective of tightening up the Gambling Control Board and the approval and authority of the loan side. So if we can come up with that, I wouldn't be opposed to that. And then secondarily, I guess if the forgivable loan statement, if it removes or puts us back into the legislative body, into that process of discussing those issues further, much as you mentioned the city of St. Paul. I remember that issue very well in the city of St. Paul. But if that does clarify that, and I guess I'd appreciate a little bit of guidance from Ms. James, that does the statement that they must all be repaid cover that, or does the not forgivable, adding the not forgivable statement further tighten up the rules or the intent of this statement to make sure that rulemaking or any other arbitrary decision-making process is tossed in place to change the intent of this section?
So before you go on, Ms. James, question I have though, I thought I heard from Senator Rest that she wanted the option for them to be forgivable.
No,
I'm not sure, Senator Coran, I'm not sure if we're all on the same page on this.
no,
Senator Coran,
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
just a moment, Senator
Ma-
Coran.
Madam Chair, I did,
Yeah.
I thought Senator Rust was very clear from the perspective of that it was very clear that it is not forgivable, and
Not
that
forgivable.
if a further request that it was to be made forgivable was a legislative responsibility.
Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Senator Rest, and then we'll go to Ms. James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Coran is correct in his interpretation of my remarks. I would just like the statement to be there that the loans are not forgivable, and if somehow in the next couple of years the organizations want to make them forgivable, they have to come back to the legislature. And if we have that language in there, that these are, all like on line 1.15, if the language was all loans made under this section are not forgivable and must be repaid, then if they want to contest that in a couple of years, they'd have to come back to the legislature and strike that language. And so I think it's a pretty simple extra protection in that area. And then on line 1.8.
So Senator Rest, before you
Yeah.
go further, let's just take
Yes.
one issue at a time.
Okay, of course,
It just makes it easier for Ms. James as
of
well.
course.
So
Madam
Senator
Chair.
Coran? Mhm.
Madam Chair, on the first portion of the first suggestion, so I'd like to have Mr. Getman's opinion before we move forward with that, and,
That would be
kind of tighten up the control of the loan from the gambling board. So.
Okay, and Mr. Getman, I'm going to ask you to comment on that, but I also want you to clarify, these are internal loans from one portion of funds that are restricted normally to proceeds being used in a certain way, being moved over to operations category. Can you just, first of all, clarify where these loans are coming from? And then secondly, address Senator Coran's question about the concept.
Absolutely, Madam Chair, and
Getman.
thank you, Senator Rest and Senator Coran. I think I can try to sum up even maybe some of the other questions as well. The purpose of paragraphs A and C are meant to deal with this short-term 90-day window to apply for that ability to loan in reverse from the gambling funds to the parent organizations to pay for the bricks and mortar. It's not meant to be forgivable, and that's where between B and D, paragraphs B and D, it's meant to be not only repaid within the year, but there's also the protection that if there's any termination plan, there must be that equation, that part of the equation that talks about the payment back of that money back to the gambling funds. So it's meant to actually, during that 90 days, the reason for the director being in there, back to your question, Madam Chair, and Senator Rest, is meant to be allowing me that immediate ability to help out these organizations with keeping the doors open for those local communities, and not wait for that next board meeting or trying to get together the quorum for the board to be able to approve it. Absolutely, we can try to set something up to have a quicker response, but this is A and C are meant to be that within 90 days emergency situation to keep the doors open. How can I, as the director, help these folks do in essence a reverse loan from the gambling back to the parent organization to keep the doors open of the bricks and mortars? Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Getman. Senator Rest?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Coran, I would yield to your maybe discussion with Mr. Getman between the committee and the floor to see if it indeed, rather than offering an amendment, to see whether it is indeed possible for the Gambling Control Board to act quickly, just like we do with a Zoom meeting. And if you are agreeable to working on that with him, and also with the forgivability issue, it does seem to me, in looking at the sections that he referenced, that it's pretty tight language, unlike some other bills that we've had that have forgivable loans in them, or not forgivable loans, unforgivable loans, if you will, that it's too easy. It's like Swiss cheese going through those. But I won't offer an amendment now, but I hope you'll think about those suggestions. And if you would talk with Mr. Getman and maybe the chair of the control board of what their position would be and how quickly they think they would be able to act on Mr. Getman's recommendations. I'm just a little bit uneasy about just a single person in this instance giving approval to these loans. And I know we give this authority under the emergency orders to the governor to do things on his own, but I wonder if we have enough time to allow the Gambling Control Board at least to weigh in. That's my concern, and I would defer to Senator Koran on it.
Thank you, Senator Rest, but I want to, as much as possible, do our work in the committee. It's very difficult to move things to the floor and do amendments. I know Ms. James has already been listening to our conversation. It seems if we want a belt and suspenders to make it clear that these are not forgivable loans, that should be able to be inserted rather quickly. As to the issue of Mr. Getman, in regards to the approval of the loans themselves, do you have some suggested language, or Senator Koran during this conversation, or Ms. James, something that can address that? Mr. Getman, do you want to go first?
Madam
Senator
Chair?
Koran, you can go first, Senator Koran.
So in light for Section A around the control, in light of the timing to achieve a quorum for the Gambling Control Board, would it be of interest, or would this be acceptable that we discuss some type of limit, a dollar amount limit on a per incident basis prior to gaining the Gambling Board's full authority to move beyond that? I don't want to muddy it up too much, but that's what I was thinking. So, Mr.
Yeah, the
Getman?
concern I have about that is the serial small ones, and they add up. So, Mr. Getman.
Actually, Madam Chair, Senator Koran, have a solution that may resolve or actually include Senator Koran's suggestion. We already have a process where I'm able to approve up to a certain dollar amount the expenditures, and then I present it to the board for final approval. And that could be something similar here, where I have the transfer of monies from the gambling accounts back to the parent organization would be initially approved by me, but would not be final until finally approved by the board at the next meeting. And therefore, they would have to repay it if it's not approved by the board at the full meeting. So it gives some immediate flexibility with the oversight of the board.
So, Mr. Getman, are you saying that under current law and this current language, you have that in place?
No, Madam Chair. No, Madam Chair. In other situations, but similarly, we have delegated authority to me as the executive director to make an initial approval, with the understanding that that approval is then reported out to the full board for then their final approval.
Yeah, Mr. Getman, that's not my question. I heard you say that. My question is, you are able to do that under this A1 amendment as written, or do you need additional language?
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Madam Chair?
Senator Koran.
And Mr. Getman, so we understood your define. Is there a statute we can refer to that delegates that authority to you that we could refer to?
Absolutely,
Mr.
Senator. Absolutely, Madam Chair, and Senator Koran, and I don't have that at my fingertips. I can.
Ms. James, might you have it? You are muted, just to let you know, Ms. James.
I'm not familiar with the statute. I'm looking for it now, but Mr. Getman may find it before I do.
I would say that would be a good adding that site in accordance with and put the statute in. Senator Rest, does that sound reasonable to you?
Certainly does.
All right, then let's find that citation and have Ms. James put that together and also add the language unforgivable loans to it as well.
Madam Chair, I can help with the forgivable loans issue more quickly, maybe. I would suggest adding whole sentences rather than trying to edit that first sentence of paragraph B.
Okay. All right.
So after that first sentence of paragraph B, so on page 1, line 16, after the period, insert loans made under this section must not be forgiven except by law. And then, so that would be belts. And then if you want suspenders too, we could add another sentence that says the Gambling Control Board is not authorized to forgive loans under this section.
All right, is that your intention, Senator Rest? And Senator Koran, where are you at on this?
That would satisfy me certainly, and I think it protects the Gambling Control Board and the organizations themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Madam
Senator
Chair, fully
Koran?
acceptable to me. Fully acceptable to me.
Mr. Getman?
Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you. Section, actually subdivision 2 of 349.152 provides that language that allows for the initial approval by the executive director and then approved at the board.
Okay, Ms. James, do you have that?
I'm looking for it.
All right.
Which subdivision?
2, please.
2 directors. I'm sorry, Mr. Getman, and then which paragraph?
I apologize.
Subdivision 1?
He said, Madam Chair, subdivision 2 is what he said, and then
Okay.
Division 2 of 349.152, and I'm trying to pull it back up. Madam Chair, thank you for your patience. I'm trying to, you almost use a lifeline to ask for help here. It is 2-4 to approve or deny operational request licenses as delegated by the board.
Okay, don't close that window, Mr. Getman, hang that there. And Ms. James, if you have it.
Madam Chair, I have it. And so what Mr. Getman is describing is that the phrase operational requests has been interpreted or would be interpreted to include these kinds of loans. Okay.
Is it sufficient, Ms. James, to do a cite to that statute specifically?
Madam Chair, it isn't the detailed description of a process that Mr. Getman was describing where it would be initially approved by the director and but not finalized until after the board acts. I would say that I'm not sure about the legal significance of that initial step that he's describing where the executive director would approve it initially, but it wouldn't be final. Instead, I might recommend a simpler, clearer approach, which would be on page 1, line 8, delete of the director, so that it just requires approval of the Gambling Control Board. And then if the Gambling Control Board wants to have a process where the executive director gives a recommendation or kind of passes an initial judgment to let the organization know it's probably going to be okay, that could be something they do informally, but that is a legal matter. It would require the approval of the Gambling Control Board.
Okay, so Ms. James, if you would do that and give us the words that would be stricken. Are you talking about, I have line 1.7, but it may be different to somebody else, but it would be after emergency expenditure. So if you could read the sentence.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is on the A2 amendment, of course, not the A1. And so The change would be on page 1, line 8, delete everything after approval. And then the resulting sentence would read, it would begin at line 4 with several lines of sites and whatnot, but beginning in the middle of line 1.7, it would read, may loan lawful gambling funds to the organization's general account for emergency expenditures with prior approval of the Gambling Control Board.
Okay. Senator Koran.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that oral amendment.
Okay, we're going to deal with this particular one oral amendment. Senator Koran, did you want to add also the language that Ms. James had, which was after to the satisfaction of the director, loans must not be forgiven except by law, and something else, or do you want to just take this first one by itself?
Madam Chair, whatever you choose.
Okay.
Either
Let's
way
take the
works.
first one then, where we strike of the director on line 1.8. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion prevails and is adopted. On line 1.8 of the director is stricken. Okay, Ms. James, if you would go to the unforgivable loans language now.
Madam Chair and members, on page 1, line 16, after the period, insert loans made under this section must not be forgiven except by law. The period, and then the Gambling Control Board is not authorized to forgive loans under this section.
Okay, Senator Koran, is that your
Madam
motion?
Chair, I'd like to move those oral amendments.
Okay. Ms. James, having been given this language, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Or
Aye.
both.
Aye.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, everybody. The motion prevails and that oral amendment is adopted as stated by Ms. James. So members, with that, we have the A2 amendment before us to the Senate File 512. So, Ms. Senator Koran, would you like to move the entire A2 amendment as amended to Senate File 512?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move the A2 amendment as amended to Senate File 512.
Okay, so moved. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 All right, belt and suspenders, we got it covered. Okay, motion does prevail. We now have Senate File 512 as amended before us. Is there any further discussion? Okay, literally seeing none. All right, then we have Senate File 512 as amended before. Senator Koran, please make your motion and then we'll vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to renew my motion to move Senate File 512, move as recommended to pass as amended to general orders.
On that motion, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand or both.
Aye.
All right, motion prevails, is adopted. Senate File 512 is hereby recommended to pass and sent to general orders. With that, members, we have concluded our agenda for today. Stay tuned for further action. As you know, we are in these days, and so I look forward to moving this bill on, and thank you for the patience of doing this within the committee. This is going to make the work just go a lot smoother when we get to the floor, which has enough to deal with. So thank you, members, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.